Some promises change everything, but at what cost? The rain had been falling since morning, the kind of soft but endless drizzle that makes the world feel smaller, heavier. Every drop that tapped against the thin kitchen window seemed to echo inside Sarah's chest. She sat at her tiny, round table, the legs uneven so it wobbled whenever she leaned on it. Her fingers trembled as she held the eviction notice, reading the words again, even though she already knew them by heart. She had been late with rent before, but never this late. The landlord had been patient for 2 months, maybe because she'd always been polite and tried to pay what she could, but patience only went so far, and now her time had run out. The paper felt like it weighed more than it should, like it carried the weight of her whole future, or what little future she could imagine from here. Sarah had lost her job at the coffee shop in May. It wasn't anything dramatic, no big argument, no shouting, just slow hours, fewer customers, and eventually her name on the layoff list. She had promised herself she'd find something quickly, but the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Job interviews came and went, but they all ended the same way. "We'll be in touch," followed by silence. The bills didn't wait. They never did. Electricity, water, rent, each envelope stacked on top of the last until they looked like a growing wall between R and peace of mind. She'd cut back on everything she could. No more coffee from the cafe down the street, no more late-night takeout, no new clothes. Still, it wasn't enough. The apartment wasn't much, but it was hers. It's a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. The paint was chipped, the pipes clanked at night, and the heater took its time in the winter. But it had a small window that caught the morning sun, and Sarah loved sitting there with a blanket, pretending life was a little brighter than it was. She had nowhere else to go. Losing this place wasn't just losing a roof over her head, it was losing the only piece of stability she had left. Her landlord, Daniel Carter, was someone she had seen maybe a dozen times in the past 2 years. He was in his late 30s, maybe 40, tall with broad shoulders and a way of carrying himself that suggested he had no trouble handling problems. He was the kind of man who wore clean, pressed shirts, even when coming to fix a leaky faucet. He spoke in short, clear sentences, always polite, never warm. That morning, she hadn't expected him to show up. She figured he'd just send another notice through the mail or slip it under her door. But around 10 o'clock, there had been a knock. 3 steady taps, not hurried, not angry. "I was searching, Sarah," he said, his voice low but steady. "We have to talk." Her stomach tightened. She didn't invite him in right away, just held the notice in her hand and waited. She expected him to say the words she feared most, that she had to be out by the end of the week, that there were no exceptions. But instead, his tone softened, almost careful. "I know things have been rough lately. I'm not here to make things harder for you." That alone was enough to make her blink. She didn't know why, but she'd always imagined landlords didn't have time for personal sympathy. "I might have a way for you to stay," he said. The words hung in the air between them. For a second, she thought he'd heard him wrong. A way for her to stay. She glanced down at the notice, then back at him, unsure if this was some kind of joke or if she was still half asleep and dreaming. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on hers, as though weighing whether to say more here in the hallway or step inside. After a brief pause, he motioned toward her kitchen. "Can I come in? I'll explain." She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, his shoes leaving small wet prints on the faded linoleum. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain, and for a strange moment, she wondered what he thought of the space. The small couch with its worn cushions, the bookshelf full of secondhand novels, the chipped mug sitting in the sink. Daniel didn't sit. He stood by the table, glancing at the eviction notice in her hand, but not commenting on it directly. Instead, he said, "You're a good tenant, Sarah. Always have been. I don't like losing good tenants if I can help it." Something in the way he said it made her pulse quicken. She didn't know why, but it was hope or confusion, but it stirred something she hadn't felt in weeks. Still, she didn't know what he was offering or why. The rain outside picked up, tapping harder against the glass. She felt the air between them shift, not exactly tense, but heavier than before. When he finally explained what he had in mind, It wasn't at all what she'd imagined. And though it wasn't the kind of thing most people would expect from a landlord, it didn't sound wrong. In fact, it sounded like the first real chance she'd had in a long time. But even as the details began to unfold, one question kept circling in her mind. Could she really trust him? That question, she knew, would keep her awake that night long after the rain had stopped. Sarah stood by the small kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around the chipped coffee mug. Even though the drink inside had gone cold, she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or suspicious. Daniel Carter, the man she had only ever known as her landlord, was standing in her apartment, his coat still damp from the rain, telling her he had a way for her to stay. She tried to steady her voice. "A way for me to stay?" He nodded slowly, as though he knew the question in her eyes before she even asked. "Yes, I think we can help each other." Daniel moved toward the window, glancing out at the gray sky, as if gathering his thoughts. He didn't have the rushed tone of someone trying to close a deal or the stern voice of someone enforcing rules. Instead, his words came carefully, like he didn't want to scare her off. "I've recently inherited a place," he began. "Up in Vermont. It belonged to my father. I haven't had much time to go up there since it passed into my hands, but it needs work, a lot of it." Sarah set the coffee mug down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. She wasn't sure where this was going. She knew it wasn't the conversation she'd been expecting when she opened the door that morning. "What kind of work?" she asked cautiously. "Cleaning, repairs, organizing things, making it livable again." He glanced at her, his gaze steady. "I can't take the time away from my job right now, but I don't want to hire strangers to do it. I'd rather have someone I can trust." She gave a small, almost nervous laugh. "You trust me?" Daniel didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "I've never had trouble with you. If you pay when you can, you're respectful of the place. That means more than you think." There was a pause filled only by the sound of rain tapping against the glass. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest. "So, what exactly are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying this," he replied, his voice even but gentler now. "If you come with me for a few weeks to help get the cabin in shape, I'll cover your rent here for the next 3 months. You'll have a place to stay while we work, and when we come back, you won't have to worry about eviction." She stared at him, unsure whether to be grateful or wary. On one hand, it was the kind of lifeline she'd been praying for, a chance to catch her breath, to stop feeling like the walls were closing in. On the other hand, it meant leaving the city, her apartment, and going away with a man she barely knew beyond polite hellos in the hallway. She pictured herself in some remote cabin, surrounded by silence and trees, with only Daniel Carter for company. The image was strange, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity made her nervous. "What's in it for you?" she asked after a moment. Daniel didn't hesitate. "The cabin's been sitting there empty, gathering dust. My father kept everything, every piece of furniture, every box of old papers. I need someone to help me sort through it. Someone who won't mind the work and who won't complain about the drive." She tilted her head. "And you couldn't find anyone else?" "I could," he admitted, "but I'd rather not. I like knowing who I'm working with." And he paused, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer than she expected. "I thought you could use a break from all this." Something about the way he said it made her look away, her cheeks warming. She didn't know if it was kindness, pity, or something else entirely, but it felt personal. Still, her mind was full of questions. What if she didn't like being away from the city? What if they didn't get along outside of short conversations? What if this whole thing turned out to be a mistake? As though sensing her hesitation, Daniel added, "You don't have to decide right now. Think about it tonight. I'll need to head up there in a couple of days, so if you want to come, you'll need to let me know by tomorrow evening." He stepped toward the door, pulling his coat tighter around him. Before he left, he turned back and said quietly, "Sarah, this isn't charity. It's an arrangement that helps us both, but I wouldn't have offered it if I didn't think it could make things easier for you." When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt different, heavier, and quieter all at once. Sarah sat back at the table, staring at the eviction notice still lying there. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about numbers or overdue bills. She was thinking about Vermont. She imagined the cabin in her mind, Dark wood walls, a fireplace, maybe a porch that looked out over a lake or forest. She pictured the smell of pine, the cold air on her cheeks, and the silence of nights without city traffic. It was such a different world from the one she knew. And then she pictured Daniel in that world. Not the landlord and a pressed shirt, but a man in rolled-up sleeves, maybe working beside her, maybe laughing over something silly. The thought made her pulse quicken, and she hated that she noticed it. She shook her head, trying to clear the image. This wasn't about him. This was about survival, about keeping a roof over her head. Still, as she climbed into bed that night, the rain still falling outside, she couldn't stop replaying the sound of his voice when he said, "I might have a way for you to stay." It wasn't a promise, wasn't even safe, not entirely, but it was hope, and she hadn't felt hope in a long, long time.